The Andromedian Defense Coalition had, in its infinite wisdom and spectacular bureaucratic bloat, decided that military excellence could be measured by the precise angle of one's ceremonial shoulder spikes and the ability to recite 17 different protocols for proper fleet formation spacing. It was a philosophy that had served them well for approximately 3 centuries, during which time they had managed to lose exactly 0 major conflicts, primarily because they had also managed to avoid fighting any. Training Station Nexus 7 hung in the void like a metallic Christmas ornament designed by committee, all gleaming surfaces and unnecessarily complex geometric patterns that probably looked impressive to visiting dignitaries, but served mainly to confuse maintenance crews trying to find the garbage chutes. The station's primary purpose was to house the Coalition's most prestigious military academy, where the offspring of various galactic species could learn the fine art of looking important while accomplishing very little. Commander Korrath stood on the observation deck of the War Game Center, his 6'7" frame encased in the pristine dress uniform of the Zelkarian High Command. His species had evolved on a planet where predators hunted primarily through intimidation, which explained both their impressive height and their unfortunate tendency to believe their own propaganda. The twin crests running along his elongated skull were polished to mirror brightness, and his 4 amber eyes surveyed the room with the satisfaction of someone who had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved by being taller than it. "Gentlemen," he announced to the assembled officers, his voice carrying the particular resonance that Zelkarians used when they wanted everyone to know they were about to say something profound. "Today we witnessed the final examination of this semester's tactical combat simulation. As you are aware, we have been graced with a human participant." A ripple of what might charitably be called amusement passed through the crowd. The Vorthans chittered in their whistling language, their crystalline exoskeletons catching the light as they shared what were undoubtedly hilarious observations about mammalian intelligence. The Keth Mari officers, resembling nothing so much as upright mantises in military dress, clicked their mandibles in approval. Even the usually stoic Graxan delegation, massive bear-like beings who typically found humor as foreign as sobriety, allowed themselves rumbling chuckles that sounded like distant thunder. Korrath continued, his tone dripping with a kind of condescension usually reserved for explaining simple concepts to particularly slow children. "As we all know, humans are enthusiastic in their approach to warfare. They have shown remarkable creativity in finding new ways to die spectacularly for causes they barely understand. However, modern fleet combat requires precision, discipline, and centuries of tactical evolution that their species simply hasn't had time to develop." He gestured toward the massive viewing screen that dominated the chamber, currently displaying the technical specifications of the exercise. "Today's simulation involves a standard fleet engagement scenario. Each participant commands a flotilla of 12 ships, 4 heavy cruisers, 6 destroyers, and 2 support vessels. The objective is simple: eliminate the opposing force while maintaining tactical coherence and demonstrating proper adherence to established combat doctrines." Admiral Thexandra, the station's Vorthan commander, stepped forward with the clicking gait common to her species. Her translated voice carried through the chamber's speakers with mechanical precision. "The betting pools have reached quite impressive levels. Current odds favor Commander Korrath at roughly 20 to 1. She paused, her compound eyes glittering with what might have been amusement. "No one appears willing to bet on the human." This revelation prompted another wave of what passed for laughter among the assembled xenophiles. The idea that a human, a species whose idea of advanced tactics involved charging directly at superior forces while screaming, might pose a threat to a decorated Zelkarian commander was apparently the height of comedy. The chamber's main doors hissed open, and Lieutenant Commander Zara Blackthorne entered with the unhurried pace of someone who had grown accustomed to being the center of unwanted attention. She stood barely 5'6" in a standard-issue Coalition uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun that somehow managed to look both professional and slightly rebellious. Her green eyes swept the assembled officers with a kind of assessment usually reserved for potential threats or interesting specimens. Korrath's mandibles spread in what his species considered a smile, but which bore an unfortunate resemblance to a predator sizing up its next meal. "Ah, Lieutenant Commander. I trust you've had adequate time to prepare for today's exercise." Zara's response was a slight nod that conveyed exactly the minimum amount of respect required by military protocol and not one iota more. "Adequate, sir." "Excellent. I'm sure you'll provide an educational experience for our observers." The pause before educational lasted just long enough to ensure everyone understood the subtext. I do hope you won't be too discouraged when this is over. Humans, I'm told, handle failure with admirable resilience. The assembled officers found this absolutely hilarious, their various forms of laughter creating a cacophony that sounded like a zoo feeding time. Zara's expression didn't change by so much as a micro-expression, which only seemed to encourage Korrath further. Perhaps, he continued, warming to his theme, we might even learn something from observing primitive tactical instincts in action. After all, studying less evolved approaches can sometimes provide insights into our own sophisticated methodologies. Lieutenant Korrath, a junior Keth Mori officer who had apparently decided to join the entertainment, stepped forward with the jerky movements characteristic of his species. Commander Korrath, would it perhaps be instructive to place certain limitations on the exercise to ensure our human colleague isn't overwhelmed by the complexity? This suggestion was met with enthusiastic approval from the crowd. Several officers began proposing increasingly condescending modifications. Perhaps the human should be given advance warning of attacks, or maybe her ships should be equipped with simplified interfaces, or possibly the engagement should be conducted at reduced speed to accommodate inferior reflexes. Throughout this display of interstellar magnanimity, Zara remained perfectly still, her expression as readable as a classified document. When the suggestions finally died down, she spoke for the second time since entering the chamber. I appreciate your concern for my limitations, she said, her tone so carefully neutral it could have been used to calibrate instruments. However, I believe standard parameters will suffice. Admiral Thexandra's compound eyes focused on the human with something approaching interest. Very well. Participants, please proceed to your command stations. The simulation will commence in 15 minutes. As the crowd dispersed to find optimal viewing positions, Korrath approached Zara with the confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved by being condescending at it. A word of advice, Lieutenant Commander. Zelkarian tactical doctrine has been refined over centuries of warfare. We don't simply react to our opponents, we anticipate them. Every move is calculated, every formation optimized. Perhaps you might consider observing rather than attempting to compete? There's no shame in learning from your superiors. Zara's green eyes met his amber ones without flinching. Thank you for the advice, Commander. I'll keep it in mind. The simulation chamber was a marvel of coalition engineering, a spherical space filled with holographic displays and sensor interfaces that could recreate any conceivable combat scenario with perfect fidelity. Each commander station was isolated in its own tactical bubble, surrounded by three-dimensional displays showing ship positions, weapon status, and tactical overlays. Korrath settled into his command chair with the satisfaction of someone about to demonstrate superior breeding to the masses. His tactical displays came alive with the familiar patterns of Zelkarian fleet doctrine, precise formations that had been tested in 1,000 simulations and refined through generations of military evolution. Each ship in his flotilla took its assigned position with mechanical precision, creating interlocking fields of fire and mutual support that any military academy would recognize as textbook perfect. On the opposite side of the simulated battlefield, Zara's flotilla began moving in patterns that defied immediate classification. Her ships spread out in what appeared to be a random scatter, their movements following no recognizable doctrine or formation protocol. To the observers, it looked like exactly what they had expected. Primitive chaos masquerading as tactics. Interesting approach, Korrath commented over the communication channel, his tone suggesting he found it about as interesting as watching paint dry. Are you perhaps attempting to implement some form of human swarm tactics? I've read about your species' tendency toward mob behavior. The observation deck erupted in appreciative chittering and rumbling. Even Admiral Thexandra's compound eyes seemed to glitter with amusement. Zara's response was characteristically economical, something like that. The engagement began with Korrath's fleet advancing in perfect wedge formation, a textbook approach that maximized forward firepower while maintaining tactical flexibility. His heavy cruisers formed the tip of the spear, their weapons already locked onto the nearest human vessels. His destroyers flanked the formation in precise intervals, ready to respond to any flanking attempts. The support vessels hung back in their assigned positions, their defensive screens active and their repair systems standing by. It was, by any measure, a perfect execution of standard coalition fleet doctrine. The kind of approach that won commendations and academy teaching positions. Zara's ships, meanwhile, continued their apparently aimless wandering. They seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, their movements following patterns that looked random to observers unfamiliar with chaos mathematics and predator-prey dynamics. Her heavy cruisers split up, abandoning the mutual support that every tactical manual insisted was essential for survival. Her destroyers darted about like caffeinated mosquitoes, their courses changing seemingly at random. "Is she having technical difficulties?" one of the Vorthan observers inquired, their translated voice carrying genuine concern. "Perhaps her command interfaces are malfunctioning." Admiral Thexandra's attention was focused entirely on the tactical display now, her compound eyes tracking the human ship's movements with growing intensity. Something about the patterns was nagging at her consciousness, some half-remembered lecture from her own academy days about unpredictable combat systems. Korrath, meanwhile, was experiencing the first faint stirrings of irritation. His perfectly executed advance was encountering nothing but empty space. Every time his targeting systems locked onto a human vessel, it would dart away in a different direction, never quite where his tactical computers predicted it should be. It was like trying to swat insects that had somehow learned to read minds. "Amusing," he commented over the comm, though his tone suggested he found it considerably less amusing than his words implied. "Are you planning to engage at some point, Lieutenant Commander? Or is the human strategy simply to run away until your fuel supplies are exhausted?" More laughter from the observation deck, though Admiral Thexandra noticed that several of the more senior officers had stopped chuckling and were now studying the tactical displays with professional interest. Something was happening that didn't fit standard tactical models. Zara's reply was maddeningly brief: "Patience, Commander." And then, as if someone had thrown a switch, the chaos resolved into perfect, terrifying order. The human ships that had been scattered across the battlefield suddenly converged from 12 different directions simultaneously. But this wasn't the crude swarm attack that Korrath had been expecting. This was something far more sophisticated and infinitely more dangerous. Each ship arrived at its attack position at precisely the same moment, their weapons already locked onto targets that had been calculated minutes in advance. Korrath's perfect formation, designed to repel attacks from any single direction, found itself facing 12 coordinated assaults from 12 different vectors. His mutual support doctrine, optimized for conventional engagements, became a liability as his ships found themselves unable to provide covering fire without risking friendly casualties. The first salvo eliminated 3 of his destroyers before their defensive systems even registered incoming fire. The second salvo, arriving before his heavy cruisers could reorient their primary weapons, crippled his flagship's propulsion systems and knocked out 2 of his support vessels. In the space of 37 seconds, Korrath's textbook perfect fleet had been reduced to scattered debris and emergency beacons. The observation deck fell silent with the kind of stunned quiet usually reserved for natural disasters and tax audits. Even the automatic translation systems seemed to have trouble processing what they had just witnessed. Korrath stared at his tactical displays with the expression of someone who had just watched the laws of physics submit their resignation. His 4 amber eyes blinked in sequence, a Zelkarian indication of severe cognitive disconnect, as he tried to process what had just happened to centuries of tactical evolution. "How?" he finally managed, his voice carrying none of its earlier condescension. "That formation, those patterns, they are not in any of the tactical databases. They violate every principle of mutual support and coordinated defense." Zara's image appeared on the main viewing screen as she stood up from her command station. For the first time since entering the chamber, she allowed herself what might generously be called a smile, though it bore a closer resemblance to the expression a shark might wear while discussing philosophy with a tuna. "You're absolutely right, Commander. They are not in the databases. That's because they are based on chaos theory and predator-prey dynamics, rather than formal military doctrine." She paused, studying the stunned faces around her. "Turns out, when you've spent your formative military years fighting a guerrilla war against superior forces, you learn to think in ways that don't appear in textbooks." Admiral Thexandra's compound eyes swiveled to focus entirely on the human. "Guerrilla warfare? Against whom?" "The Terran corporate authority, during the colony independence wars. Spent 3 years fighting corporate security forces with whatever equipment we could steal, salvage, or jury-rig." Zara's tone was conversational, as if she were discussing the weather rather than military conflict. Turns out, when conventional tactics mean certain death, you get creative. Or you get dead. I preferred getting creative. The silence stretched until Commander Korrath finally found his voice. You're saying that display of tactical innovation was based on combat experience against your own species. Humans fight the way we do everything else, Commander. Messily, creatively, and with complete disregard for the rules that say it can't be done. Zara's smile widened slightly. We're really quite terrible at following other people's definitions of impossible. Lieutenant Krextal, the Keth Mori officer who had suggested limitations earlier, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. Lieutenant Commander, I believe I owe you an apology. Your tactical display was most educational. No apology necessary, Zara replied. Though I do hope this means I won't need any special accommodations for my primitive reflexes in future exercises. The observation deck erupted in what could only be described as nervous laughter. The kind of sound creatures make when they realize they've been making jokes about apex predators while standing in the predator's territory. Admiral Thexandra approached the human with movements that were considerably more respectful than they had been an hour earlier. Lieutenant Commander Blackthorne, I believe we need to have a discussion about revising our tactical curriculum. It appears our understanding of human military capabilities has been incomplete. Happy to help, Zara said. Though you might want to warn the other instructors that human tactics tend to make academic traditionalists nervous. We have this unfortunate habit of ignoring rules that don't work and inventing new ones that do. As the assembled officers began filing out of the chamber, their conversations carried a distinctly different tone than they had earlier. Words like revolutionary and paradigm shift began appearing in multiple languages, along with considerably more respectful references to human tactical innovation. Commander Korrath remained standing by the tactical displays, staring at the replay of his defeat with the expression of someone undergoing a fundamental philosophical crisis. Admiral Thexandra approached him with the careful movements of someone dealing with fragile electronics. Commander, the betting pools will need to be settled, she said gently. Korrath's response was barely audible. 20-1 odds. 20-1. He looked up at the Admiral with eyes that had seen too much. We waged against a species that fights civil wars for practice and calls it getting creative. As the chamber emptied, Zara remained at his station, reviewing the tactical logs with the methodical attention of someone who had learned that survival depended on understanding exactly why something worked. The patterns that had seemed chaotic to outside observers revealed themselves as complex mathematical structures when examined closely, probability cascades and decision trees that accounted for dozens of variables simultaneously. She was interrupted by Admiral Thexandra's approach. The Vorthan commander's compound eyes were focused entirely on the human, but the attention no longer felt like examination, it felt like professional respect. Lieutenant Commander, I have a question that I hope you won't find impertinent. Go ahead. When you entered this chamber, you allowed Commander Korrath and the others to express their opinions regarding human tactical capabilities. You could have corrected their assumptions at any point. Why didn't you? Zara's green eyes met the Admiral's compound ones with perfect steadiness. Because, Admiral, sometimes the most effective tactic is to let your opponents convince themselves they've already won. Makes them much less likely to notice when they are walking into an ambush. Admiral Thexandra's mandibles clicked in what her species considered appreciative laughter. And the betting pools? 20-1 odds against human victory. Well, Zara said, her smile returning with compound interest, I may have mentioned the exercise to a few friends back on Oath. Turns out humans will bet on absolutely anything, especially when the odds are that good. Should be an interesting payday for the human community here on Nexus 7. As Admiral Thexandra processed this information, her compound eyes widened with something approaching admiration. You orchestrated the entire situation. The mockery, the condescension, the betting pools, all of it was calculated to maximize the psychological impact of your victory. Humans call it playing the long game, Admiral. Sometimes the most important battle happens before the shooting starts. Zara gathered her personal effects and headed toward the exit. Same time next week for the next exercise. Actually, Lieutenant Commander, I believe we'll be making some significant changes to our curriculum structure. Would you be available to consult on revised tactical protocols? Happy to help. Though I should probably warn you, once humans start helping with military planning, things tend to get interesting very quickly. As Zara left the chamber, Admiral Thexandra remained behind, contemplating the tactical displays and the profound implications of what had just occurred. The Coalition's military doctrine, refined over centuries and tested in countless simulations, had just been casually dismantled by a single human using principles that weren't even classified as military science. She activated her personal communications device and began composing a priority message to Coalition Command. The subject line read, "Urgent revision required, Human Military Capabilities Assessment." In the message body, she began typing, "Recent combat simulation results indicate that our current understanding of Terran tactical doctrine is not merely incomplete, but dangerously inadequate. Recommend immediate reassessment of all human military personnel classifications and integration protocols. Also recommend investigation into the apparently significant gap between human civilian population estimates of their own military capabilities and reality." She paused, considering how to phrase the next part tactfully, then decided that tact was a luxury they couldn't afford. Additionally, recommend immediate review of all interspecies betting regulations. Humans appear to have weaponized gambling. The response from Coalition Command arrived within hours, marked with priority classifications that Admiral Thexandra hadn't seen since the last major diplomatic crisis. The message was brief and to the point, assessment confirmed by multiple independent sources. Human military doctrines now classified as advanced, unpredictable. All future exercises involving Terran personnel to be conducted under revised protocols. Also, Accounting Department reports unusual activity in interspecies financial markets. Please advise. Admiral Thexandra's reply was even briefer. Suggest we avoid future situations where humans can manipulate the odds in their favor. They appear to find this entertaining. Meanwhile, in the officers' quarters designated for human personnel, Zara was receiving a stream of communications from Earth that consisted largely of expressions of gratitude mixed with detailed accounts of financial windfalls. Apparently, word of the 20-to-1 odds had spread through the human community with a speed typically reserved for gossip about celebrity scandals or free food. Her personal communication device chimed with an incoming message from her former commanding officer back in the Terran Defense Corps. "Heard you gave the aliens a lesson in applied chaos theory. Proud of you, kid. Try not to start any wars by accident." Zara's response was characteristically succinct, no promises. As Training Station Nexus 7 continued its stately orbit around the local star, the ripple effects of the day's exercise began spreading through the Coalition's military hierarchy with the inexorable force of bureaucratic panic. Tactical manuals were being revised, training protocols were under emergency review, and somewhere in the depths of Coalition intelligence, analysts were frantically trying to determine exactly how much they didn't know about human military capabilities. Commander Korrath, for his part, had requested a transfer to the Diplomatic Corps, citing a newfound appreciation for the complexities of interspecies relations and a strong desire to avoid further tactical engagements with humans. His request was immediately approved by superiors who had received rather alarming reports about the statistical improbability of his defeat. In the grand scheme of galactic politics, the incident would eventually be filed under minor training exercise results and forgotten by most of the Coalition bureaucracy. But in the smaller, more practical world of military education, it would be remembered as the day that 3 centuries of tactical doctrine discovered it had been fundamentally misunderstanding the nature of warfare. And in the even smaller, considerably more profitable world of interspecies gambling, it would be remembered as the day that humans proved they could weaponize mathematics, psychology, and bookmaking simultaneously. The Andromedian Defense Coalition had, in its infinite wisdom and spectacular bureaucratic bloat, just learned that the most dangerous thing about humans wasn't their tendency toward violence or their creative approach to problem-solving. It was their unfortunate habit of treating everything, including military defeat and financial markets, as just another interesting puzzle to be solved.